is the founder of Social Thinking and a globally recognized thought leader, author, speaker, and social cognitive therapist. Dedicated to helping people of all ages develop social emotional learning, including those with social competency challenges. Across her 30-plus year career, she has created numerous evidence-based strategies, treatment frameworks, curricula to help interventionists foster social competencies in those they support. So Michelle's work also teaches how these competencies impact a person's broader life, including their ability to maintain relationships and their success in school and career. And I know we're joined this evening, Michelle, by not just parents of adopters and others with experience of the care network, also with professionals in the education and the social work sphere. So I have spoken enough. I'm going to go away. I'm going to hand over to you, and I hope everybody enjoys the webinar tonight. Michelle Garcia Winner, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice to be invited. And that I've been to Edinburgh. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. Edinburgh a number of times, and I'm wishing I was there speaking to you in person, if I could be completely honest. It's a beautiful area. So the topic today, and we only have an hour, and so there's a lot that I can't share with you right now, but let me get you started with kind of the reason I developed this, and for you to think about this in your work as family members or educators, counselors, whoever it is you are. If you have the chance of being around other people or working with them or living with them, then you are engaging in social thinking, but you may not know that. So I want to explain just kind of treatment models and experience. My background started in the late 1970s in autism, and that was really intriguing to me, studying that social brain, and did that for a number of years, and then that was in my graduate school in a different state, and I ended up coming back home to California. Nothing much was interesting to me going on in California in the 1980s. We still weren't talking about an autism spectrum. But I ended up working in a high school with very verbal kids, where largely I had been working with students who had very limited language, and I had been trained as a strong behaviorist and a compassionate behaviorist. But when I got to working in the high school with very verbal kids, they were also verbally very angry about working on social skills, and immediately started by telling me they hated me, and being able to figure out how to think through social in a more sophisticated way. And so that's kind of what ended up with me evolving the development of social thinking to help my students remove the argument and focus on social emotional learning. So to that end, I'm just going to kick you off. One of the messages of today is no matter, and I know there's a lot of frustration in terms of working with students who have histories, adoption, whether that dovetails with attachment challenges, or whether that dovetails with sensory issues, or all different types of early things that we see and translate as being behaviors that can be challenging in terms of emotional regulation and all of that. And as I started with in autism and then started working in the high school, I started seeing the relationship between all of this, and not seeing individuals as having a diagnosis, but seeing them more as trying to understand what makes them tick. What is it? How is their brain processing information that results in what we're seeing in front of us? And what if we go a little deeper and we work on helping them to process information a little bit differently? Perhaps that will help them even engage differently in this whole set of social emotional competencies, which dovetail into, if you've heard these words, executive functioning, self-regulation, all of that. They're all part of the same package, but different professionals have different specialties. And one of the weird things in social is that literally there's no treatment professional strongly trained in social cognition. It is just something we take for granted. So that's what I wanted to kind of start off with. This is one of my friend's daughters and her cousin, and she is just, she's 3 years old here, and I think he's either an older 3 or a young 4-year-old, but just watch them play and notice how much they notice each other, how they're interpreting each other, how their goal is to engage and try to figure out a plan, but they're just so little. No one has taught them how to do what you're about to see. And yet what you're about to see is what we take for granted that every child can do, so that they can go be part of a classroom, that they can imagine what's going on in their coursework, they can figure out what people are saying in novels, all of that. So check this out. So one of the things I love about that clip is if you didn't hear the soundtrack and you were just kind of in the distance watching, you'd say, well, those kids are kind of playing together, but they're really not playing together because they're physically not in alignment. But when you hear the clip, what you see is they're playing with the imagination of the mind and constantly flexing, imagining they can be in different roles. They're not ready to carry out those roles and sustain play. They're too young, but they're playing with this idea that we can pretend and pretend and pretend. And that these are some of the real, the incredible things the social mind does that we totally take for granted. Like right away, you see mental flexibility, you see empathy, you see engagement. And the frustration is there's no standardized test that accounts for this. And I was at a school in the United States that actually takes kids from all over the world who are considered to have massive behavior challenges, threatening, hard to manage behavior, and they're adolescents. And so this school implements something like our work, certainly appreciates this, and they brought me in to do a keynote because once a year they bring all the parents together. It's a mandatory thing. You must come for a weekend of learning how their kids are doing, but also education about what their kids are learning about. And as I worked, I showed this video to all the parents there, and I asked them to raise their hands if their children engaged in what we call shared imaginative collaborative play at 3 and 4 years old. Were they able to be around others and just harmoniously, you know, not all play is harmonious, but for the most part, the intention is there and kids work it out and they adapt and they adapt and they adapt. And not a single parent raised their hand. That behavior, when we call someone behavior disordered, it doesn't mean that the problem is their behavior. Yes, the problem appears to be the behavior, but what is it that's going on in their mind that leads them to those responses? Your kids aren't, no child is waking up going, I can't wait to go ruin everyone's play today. That there's a harmony that goes on and it's intuitive in our mind trying to figure that out. So as we, you know, I've traveled a large part of the world giving talks over the years. One of the great joys of this career I have, other than working with my clients. And what I find is that there's such a people are strongly entrenched in treatment that treats the behavior as if the behavior is the only thing going on with this kid. And so largely, that's called social skills treatments, where we identify and we write goals. here's the behavior, here's how we're trying to fix the behavior. And it may not be completely aberrant. It's not yelling or hitting necessarily. That would be covered by a behavior plan, but these are like taking turns using eye contact. In fact, I think I have some slides for that. So social skills tend to be taught as explicit behavioral responses to encourage explicit behavioral responses without any explanation for how the production of that behavior communicates or regards other people in that situation. And this is one of the things that blows my mind, is that we spend a lot of energy teaching children to do behaviors that are social in nature, but we never teach them how other people are thinking and feeling about the behavior. If the child does the behavior that is being taught, they get a reward, and they are taught that behavior produces the reward. What I think they should be taught is that behavior leads others to have thoughts and feelings that are more comfortable, and the reward comes in the fact that we want to be together. And so I started as a strong behaviorist because I began working with students for many years. The first 12 years of my career was working with students who did not have the language or the ability to really navigate the world in their mind. That's what language provides to us. And so they were without the development of language, or they were minimally verbal, and we needed to provide compassionate behaviorism because they didn't have enough sophistication in being able to think about thinking and talk about thinking and feelings. So I had a lot of experience about that. Then I came to these high school kids who are arguing with me because we were all just teaching them to behave, and they were so tired of feeling like they were bad or wrong. We were also grouping them with other kids who had far less social ability, and they always felt like, I've had so many clients tell me, you think I function like that kid? I mean, the thing about social is it's a judgment in our mind, and just because you have some social learning challenges doesn't mean you don't see aspects of the social world. So these were some of the dilemmas I was hitting on. Examples of social skills commonly taught as behaviors: turn taking, the one arm rule for kind of how far you should stand. We teach say hi, come on, just say hi, say hi. And yet it's not really how you and I say hi. Often the behaviors we're teaching are not really what we do in social situations. Using eye contact is a great example. We teach someone to stare at someone's face. You and I don't just stare at people's eyes. We actually use our eyes to think about what's going on around us. So in social thinking, I changed it to have my students learn to think with their eyes, not stare with their eyes, because the whole point of the eyes is to attend and interpret, which I'll share you later. We can also teach routine little words that you say, thank you, please. And you can teach all of this and reward the behavior. Sometimes I feel that if we focus so much on the behavior, we create little narcissists because it's all about how they're behaving and getting a reward for it without them ever realizing the impact that their expected or unexpected behavior has on others. So with behaviorism, when we're reinforced for producing a specific social skill, the student's not taught about this interpretation of what I call what's going on in the social world. It's not just what's happening in your kitchen or what's happening in your bathroom or bedroom. It's how is this child in the world? And if we want to encourage them to do something called generalization, which is be able to learn and carry it with them wherever they go, then we have to move away from here's a reward for what you just did here to understanding how do we figure out what to do here based on our own goal. So let me give you an example of saying hi. If we're teaching it through a behavioral treatment program, we may see, and it's very common, kids I work with who have social emotional learning challenges, whether they're trauma-informed, attachment, whether they have a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, or whether they have all of that, which is also possible. If they're not saying hi at all, usually you begin by telling someone, okay, here's how we're going to say hi. So you say hi. And in our kind of Western culture, say hi, and there's an eye contact connection and there's a wave. And so you get them to say hi and they get a reward every time they say hi. So now this student goes into different teachers, and each time, or this one particular teacher, and every time they enter the room, they say hi all day long, every time they come in, and every time they're given a reward. And now we've got data and data and data saying, oh, we got this kid to say hi every time he saw me. That is fabulous. He said hi to me 20 times today. Yes. Sounds great, right? Like he's initiating all on his own, saying hi, he gets a reward. Great. What's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that is it's not how it works. That you and I now step back and watch it from a social world lens. How does the social world work? Not, did you just say hi? How do we do it? We greet each other. The first time we see someone, if we see them in the morning, afternoon, but it's the first time we see someone that we know who we want to greet, we'll give a robust hi. So we'll wave, we'll look at them, we'll smile, and we might say words, hi. Okay, the second time we see that exact same person, we see them, we're at a school, we're walking down a hall, we see them later, 10 minutes later. All of a sudden, here's what we do the second time. There's no wave, there's no words. We look at them, we give a little bit of a smile, not a huge one. Third time we see you, same person, same day. We're walking by, we catch that we're going to see you. Now we look at our phone, we look at the floor, we do something else, because to overgreet someone is super creepy. But the behavioral community has a ton of research saying, look at all the data, the empirical data that we got that. And so it's like, great, great, great. And you know what? It is great for a kid who's really not able to engage in this more sophisticated understanding. But for our more kids who are seen as blending, as starting to blend in, or the goal is that they're going to be able to navigate their way around school without help and be able to be included in groups and all of that, we need to teach more sophisticated approaches, which is to move away from memorizing a behavior, because to be competent socially is not to memorize, but to problem solve. And that's what I will be working with you more about today. So I just went through that second slide with you. So again, just to summarize, we focus on the production of a correct skill as noting progress, even if the student's not aware of what they're doing. I've had so many students work with me who are teenagers, young adults, even 10-year-olds, and they'll have grown up on being reinforced for everything they were doing. And in fact, one of the things that really pushed me into this more social cognitive behavioral mode was my students, even young kids, like 8-year-olds, were not accepting the reinforcement, and they were constantly negotiating for the next best thing and the next best thing. And it just felt like they had people tied around their fingers because they refused to do anything without the reward that they constantly craved had to get better and better. When actually in the social world, the reward is people want to be with us. We want to be with people. We're part of a community. I had this little kid one day, this not so little kid, I'd worked with him since he was about 8, and now he's about 11. And 11, he's in this group with other boys, and 11-year-olds are never really fun to have in a group. It can be, I'm being sarcastic, but it's a tricky age. And so this 11-year-old afterwards comes up to me, and the other kids had left. He goes, Michelle, is there like a reward? Is there a sticker or something in one of those boxes on your shelf? And I'm like, oh, would you like a sticker because you've done a good job today? Because he's on these behavioral plans at school. And he goes, yes. And I said to him, okay, did you do a good job in the group today? Did the kids enjoy your participation? He goes, yes. And I go, would the kids like you to come back next week and still be part of this group? And he goes, yes. And I said, do you want to come back next week and be part of this group? And he goes, yes. And I said, that's your reward. See you next week. I love working with you. Bye. And that's important. When do we fade out these rewards and focus on the feeling of togetherness as rewarding? And how do we help to teach that is something that's really been essential in terms of teaching people how to be part of something bigger than themselves. I have a ton of teenagers who will tell me, I don't want friends. everyone's a jerk. You have to help me because I just have to get along with I have to figure out how to manage working with jerks. Not a single kid in my school is nice. And with those kids, we actually don't pursue friendship. You know, with this particular kid who comes to mind, he was like, everyone's a jerk. Don't even try to convince me they're not a jerk. He goes to a school for, you know, a pretty gifted school. And, but he said, don't even try. So I just said to him, okay, I just don't know. I don't know what jerks do. What are your jerks at school doing? Could you go observe the jerks and come back and report to me about the jerks? And that opened a door for him to start observing. And you know what we found out was he had never observed his peers before. He looks like a typical kid. He's a kid who was starting to get diagnosis late, 14 years old, but he didn't even know how to observe. And once he started observing, he started starting to figure out how the social world works. That's what I'm really interested in. So in the social world of social thinking, it's developmental. Our social lives are developmental all the way across our life. Throughout our life, we are evolving. I just turned 60 and went out with some friends this weekend. And of course, what's the development of 60-year-olds? You start counting up how many doctors you're seeing, and we have a lot of humor about it, but also emotionally, socially, what you want, how you see the world around that. And so often when a behavioral teaching, it is not developmental. We focus on what is the behavior and do that because that's what we want from you. So we do, though, recognize, and I really want to make sure you're hearing this, that behavioral teaching is very appropriate when it's done with compassion for kids who cannot learn to think socially, that's just beyond their skill set. So this type of individual is likely experiencing limited social attention. They're very kind of spaced out in terms of what's going on around them. Literal interpretation, they're very, very literal. They have minimal ability to really use language robustly. They're more at the word phrase level, or they will use sentences, but they're very immature for their age. Very limited social self-awareness. We see these three things going together: social attention, social interpretation, social self-awareness. An example of social self-awareness is somebody who would like pick their nose and eat it in front of others in a class. And they're older than 6 years old. And even 6-year-olds usually aren't doing that in a class. And so social self-awareness, and then the inability to make sense of their own and others' thoughts and feelings, just to even talk about it is so confusing. And so if somebody's lining up with this kind of a profile, we would say compassionate behaviorism first. And as they get a little bit older, up into their 9s, 10s, 11, we can start teaching them a bit about the social world, but they're always going to need to hinge on something more concrete, like a behavior plan, to help them understand they need really concrete expectations. So also toddlers and young children who are just not able to take in that much abstraction. Now our curriculum starts at 4 years old, and we have a very stair-step curriculum of 10 storybooks that some of you probably are using there. But usually we don't feel that developmentally children are ready to really start engaging in talking about thoughts. Especially kids with histories of some social emotional learning developmental challenges, until they're 4 years old, and sometimes 5 or 6 or 7, depending on the child. So you already heard about my start in the high school, and social thinking was a work born out of desperation, because as a professional, if I wasn't making a meaningful difference, I just didn't want to be there. And so how could I make a meaningful difference when I had kids who were refusing to attend social skills groups and saying, it's so stupid, I can't stand it. And so the focus then became on me learning not about their behavior, but how do they interpret things? What's going on inside their mind? How do they see the situation? And do they know that they have thinking inside of their mind? Do they know that other people have thinking? Do you know that when you come into a group, we all have thoughts about each other? And so with that, I also started developing treatment frameworks and strategies. Some of the strategies are vocabulary. We don't have a language of talking about social, we just expect it. So, you know, telling someone that their behavior is appropriate or inappropriate doesn't do it for me. Because when you talk to someone about that's inappropriate, it's also an emotional judgment call, which makes our folks really defensive. So I actually was observing them, and I think from working with students with classical autism, I really grew up professionally just observing like crazy. When you work with folks who cannot communicate, you have to try to figure out what's going on in their minds. Now you work with highly verbal students, I still have to try to figure out what's going on in their mind. Just because they talk a lot, it doesn't mean they're telling me what's upsetting them, they can't identify the problem, or they're not accounting for other people as also having thoughts and feelings. They may always think they're right without being able to take that other perspective. So as I started observing, I started creating treatment. And so I started this what's called social thinking vocabulary. Things like every person has thoughts and feelings. Groups have plans. Whenever you're with another person and they're doing something, they have a plan. Can you figure out their plan? The big words for this is intention and motivation. But I was working with students as they were, you know, some of my students have super impressive vocabulary, but not great depth of understanding flexible meaning of vocabulary. So I made a very intentional choice to not use big vocabulary words when I taught them. So our work sounds fairly basic. Read the group plan, think with your eyes. Is your body in the group or out of the group? Do you have flexible thinking or stuck thinking? Can you make smart guesses, or is that a wacky guess? And we just started breaking this all down. And as I broke it down, I saw my students started using this language. But the more we talked about something, the better they could pay attention to it, the better they began to observe things. One of the things that to this day kind of blows my mind a little bit is I'm working with students. My passion is working with adolescents through mature adulthood. My oldest client right now is 72, is a lawyer and has had a robust career, but not particularly successful in the personal aspects of his life. This is not unusual, late diagnosis guy. And we have so many assumptions about someone who's so accomplished, understands about the social world, and our assumptions are often wrong. I worked with somebody who works at one of the big Silicon Valley companies. He was a lead engineer at a place that you have heard of. And he was struggling, and I showed him about how our thoughts, that we each think through each other's thoughts and emotions. And he was just kind of blown away. And he's like, that was called a social behavior map. He's like, can I take this home? So these frameworks and strategies, which I'll show you a little bit of, they're considered evidence-based in the field of speech-language pathology as well as mental health, because they are highly informed by relevant and current research. They are utilized by an experienced clinician, which myself and my team are, and they incorporate heavily client family values, which include cultural values. And so we don't prescribe a service to a client. We present ideas and meld those ideas based on the child's developmental age, culture, values, needs, and we go from there. So I asked my boys, my kids, I was working with girls and boys in the high school, but I had this group of boys together, and they were about 15 years old. And one of the things I noticed about a lot of this particular group I was working with is they are highly verbal. Each one of them talks a lot. There wasn't a lot of listening going on, but there was a whole lot of talking and interrupting and vying for attention. So I'm curious, and I'm still curious to this day, what goes on inside of the thoughts and feelings inside of my client's mind? What's it look like in there? And language is a great way to figure this out, because language gives you a pathway to metacognition, to think about thinking and feeling. So I say to these boys, there's about 4 of them in the group, and I say, I have a question for you. Let's see, I think it's on the next slide here. Here was my question. When you're at school, do people think about you when you're not talking? Now, parents and family members, you can do this at home too. When you're at home, do people think about you when you're not talking? When you're at a store, do people think about you when you're not talking? Now, when you're working with our students, you're asking these questions. The hardest thing that we must do as the person asking the question is to be quiet. Don't talk for your student. Don't talk for your child. Just be quiet and let them think. And when you be quiet and you give them something to think about and you let them think, and sometimes this will go on for, I keep an eye on them to see if they're still thinking or are they getting really distracted. So before I lose them to distraction, then I'll ask them to tell me what they're thinking about, repeat the question. And it was fascinating because these boys, one of them said, no, nobody thinks about me when I'm not talking. The other kids all agreed. So I thought, oh, isn't that fascinating? Now think about it. If they don't think people think about them when they're not talking, and as a human, they want to be thought about, what do they need to do? Talk a lot. So then I said, well, what if you came to school on one day you just chose to wear like this big costume to school and no one else is wearing costumes on that day? Would people think about you then? Silence. And then they're like, yeah, people would think about me. And I'm like, really? Even when you're not talking? They go, yeah. So here was my goal. Once I heard that, I started thinking about it. And I go, I wonder if people think about us all the time. They just don't have big thoughts or uncomfortable thoughts or fabulous thoughts, that maybe we're aware of people all of the time. So I had this guy who was referred to me as 18 years old, just turning 18, sweet guy, it turns out, but he doesn't look sweet when I first meet him. Really large physique, and no teenager is really ever happy to see me. And so I have to develop some relationship with him. And so he comes in, we're talking, and I'm trying to learn what he's interested in stuff. And he's very indignant that people, that no one's talking to him and he doesn't really have any role. No one cares about him, or he's just not interested in school. It's gotten way too hard, the executive functions, and he just wasn't getting his work done, all this stuff. So led to a longer, bigger story. But I said to him one day, I heard you went to, he was refusing to acknowledge people think about him. He goes, nobody thinks about me. No one notices me. I'm, there's no point in even being in school. And that's what the parents were really upset about, because he pulled himself out of school. And he goes, because no one thinks about me. I'm just always by myself. I might as well be at home. And so I knew he went to a fast food restaurant. So I said to him, so you went and you sat down with your parents in the restaurant and you all sat at a table together and ate? And he goes, yeah. And I go, did anyone think about you? Was the restaurant crowded? And he goes, yeah, it was pretty crowded. And I said, and no one thought about you? No one noticed you? No one? And he goes, no, absolutely nobody thought about me. No one noticed me. So I said, okay, weird question. Did someone sit on you? And he's like, what? And I go, did someone sit on you? And he goes, why would you say that? And I go, well, if no one noticed you, they'd pull out your chair and sit down. And he's like, oh. And I go, maybe people do notice you. Maybe people do think about you. Maybe people are expecting you to think about them too. And it opened a door to a really interesting conversation. As weird, as wacky as the question was, it engaged. And I think it's an important place for us to start, really. It's not on the behavior of just this kid's by himself. It's what's going on. Do you understand how the social world works? This is not measured on a test. There are so many really gifted people out there who still don't quite understand this. So I started talking to my students about social thinking and related social skills. I was always thrown by social cognition, this big word. I took a class on social cognition. It was so abstract. I could not really learn it at 23. But I'm like, because it just doesn't make sense to my experience. Propositionality, they keep talking about propositionality and suppositionality. And I'm like, propositionality is what people do in bars. And so when I started social thinking, I intentionally did it with short words, common words. And to this day, when I'm even working with my mature adults, we are using this same basic language about reading people's group plans, or, you know, reading the intention. We will ramp that up. But body in the group is, where do people think your body is? Recently, one of my adult, my 72-year-old told me he felt very triumphant because he was walking with a couple of relatives on a trail. He went off, and I've been really teaching him about social thinking, that people think about each other and thoughts and feelings, and these coexist even when language isn't there. And he went off to the bathroom, and he came back, and he did not get upset because he saw these two people talking. And he did not join their group. He didn't rejoin them. He just waited to the side. And I'm like, tell me more about that. And he goes, oh, I used to feel furious because when I was around and two people were talking without me, I was sure they were talking about me. I was sure they just were talking because they didn't want to be with me. And he had all this paranoia. It was fascinating to hear. You and I, if we live, even when we live with someone, we do not know what we're thinking and they're thinking until we probe and try to figure that out. Our information then best serves, obviously, without the best language here, normal to advanced intelligence and solid, solid learning abilities. It doesn't mean there aren't some learning disabilities, but solid language skills across the ages, as we're focusing on this discussion of metacognition, the ability to think about not only our own thoughts and others, but there's a field of metacognition called social metacognition, where you also think about the thoughts and feelings of others in tandem with yourself. And whenever you read this, you'll see, wow, this is so complicated, it's very hard to measure. So it's a constant problem there. With children, we started with getting kids to really think about themselves as detectives rather than as behavior producers, and being a detective. When I go into schools, and I'm often called in, not on the easy ones, but on the hard ones, kids, and they want me to get to know a kid, I usually ask if the classroom door has a window in it, I want to take that kid out of the class, have him lean back in through the window and tell me what's happening in that class. I think our kids, when they're in the midst of things, they have a very hard time accounting for it and observing. But if we pull them away and get them distant, can they make sense of what's going on as detectives? And then as we age up, we change language around. Oh, you were a detective, now you're a spy. We used to use, or we still use, the TV show you've probably heard of, CSI, which is a detective show. I'm sure it's come to your country. I'm sure some of you have watched it. But we took those initials CSI because that's cool for teenagers because they know that show. And we called it a CSI group in the summer, and we'd call it Community Social Investigation, and just constantly working on this observational thread. So in our second edition that just came out, we're really working on getting kids to think about being a detective, not just of how do people think and feel, but what's the situation? Who are the people? What's happening? Here's a kid who apparently is going up and down the slide over and over again. This other kid's kind of confused. That's this kid saying, I'm doing it again. We get kids to think about that there are these clues, and detectives collect clues and have to make smart guesses. In the social world, it's not memory, it's being able to figure it out. It's the problem solving. We call all of this thinking with your eyes and reading the plan. Where am I? What's happening? What's going on with this person? How do I figure out what he's doing right now? Now, it requires world knowledge, because if you're from a country that doesn't have a ball that looks like that and you don't use one of these gloves, you actually don't know what's going on with this kid. And so there's all these pieces I'm going to put together for you in just a minute. Anytime we think about ourselves and others, internally in our mind, driving in our cars, sitting at wherever we are engaging in metacognition. What we want to do with our students is highlight this, bring it out, get them to realize there's that stop and think inside of our brain that tries to make sense of things. And we use a lot of visual supports, these frameworks, to help also get our students to focus on seeing how the world works as they're making sense of it, as we were talking about. So here's one of the things, here's a framework. We would not expect our students to just make sense of friendship. In fact, they might assume they know everything there is to friendship. And they may say, yeah, I have a friend, or no, I don't have a friend. But due to questions from our clients that were asking us, one particular kept saying to me, Michelle, teach me about friendship. And I didn't know what he wanted to learn. He couldn't tell me. So after at first, rebuffing him, he kept asking me. So I was like, what is it he wants to know? So I came up with, and then worked on this with my colleague, Pam Crook, and we came up with different levels. Level 1 is friendly greetings. Level 2 is acquaintance. You happen upon someone, so you happen to talk to them. Level 3 is you start making plans because in the convenience of the environment you're in, like school or work or religious place or sports, because you happen to be around these folks so much, you start choosing who you might want to be with in that environment, and you start hanging out in that environment. Level 4 is bigger organizational leap. Now you're making plans to be with someone outside of our environment. Children's friendships are largely 1, 2, and 3. And actually us in the work environment, we love most of our friends, a lot of them never go higher than level 3. If you're working at work, you're meeting people all the time, you're hanging out, you're talking to them. Then we go to that friend that we actually are meeting up at our house, the movie theater, restaurant, wherever, if we're kids. But that takes a lot of organizational work. It takes a lot of time to stay connected to them. And then we have the bonded friends, are the folks that we're being with, that we're planning to be with, like teenagers. You have this group of kids that you are going to hang out with on Friday night. And it's not, do you want to hang out? It's having to opt out. I can't hang out tonight because this group is constantly spending time together at school and outside of school. The one thing that's weird about bonded friends is usually you have 1 or 2 friends who you're really close with, but they bring in 1 or 2 friends they're really close with. So you end up with this group with kids that you don't like them all, but they're your close friends because you're always hanging out with them on Friday, but you're trying to avoid talking to that one kid. So when we're teaching about bonded friend, it's like, you're not gonna like all of this when friends of friends are coming in, but you cope with it anyway because there's a value in being part of this group. I'm not talking about peer pressure, I'm talking about healthy kind of friendships. Close friend are 1, 2, or 3 friends that we really share our vulnerabilities with. Friendships are on again, off again. I show this to you not to really focus on the friendship pyramid, but this is a good representation of what we do at social thinking. We break it down the social world to build up social competencies. Yesterday, I was working with a man in his 60s who's a retired medical professional who's never really got in alignment socially, and now he's really working on it, and we're working on just levels 1 and 2, friendly greetings and acquaintances. A lot of us who are coming back into the world from the pandemic, this is where community is at right now. Say hi and talk to the person you happen to be near with and share an experience. You don't have to be high up on the pyramid to feel part of community. But what I worry about with the kids I work with the kids you're here to learn about in our community, where we have some of these social emotional learning challenges, don't take for granted level 1, 2. Don't skip greetings. Greetings show the world that you're open to participate, and acquaintances help you to be flexible in meeting different people. So a lot of our kids, though, are trying to go, oh, I just want this. I want level 5. And they want to skip all these steps. A person who's got a healthy social life actually has a few, more than a few people down here, and then a few people up here in each of the categories. But it's not, we don't expect you to have 20, 30. It's not Facebook. This is not just counting people because they know your name. Here's another one, size of the problem, small, medium, big. We define those and we connect it to people's emotional experiences and helping them understand the expectation is small problem, small emotion, big problem, bigger emotion. If you have a small problem with a big emotion, you've created a new problem, and that is people are upset with you about your emotion. So none of this fixes and solves a problem right away. It gets our guys metacognitively thinking, what size is my problem? And once you realize that your problem is not huge, a lot of our students who have difficulty with flexible thinking tend to either think it's good or it's bad. It's small or it's big. And getting them to think through, and they always think because it's a problem, that it must always be big. So just helping with their reasoning, their understanding, giving them that language. We align with cognitive behavioral therapy that our thinking affects what we do. We can monitor, we can alter and learn new ways to think about things, which can alter how we react and respond in the world. We're one step more though than cognitive behavioral, because we bring in so much teaching into our work without the assumption of how the social world works. So as I've been saying, we're certainly not a treatment for everyone. And so this is a list of some of the many different diagnoses that are related to social. And I should have thought to have come back into this list with knowing you guys are my audience and added in attachment disorders and trauma, all of these different things. Anything that has a social, is part of a social experience, no matter what diagnostic label, if it includes social as part of that label, is potentially someone that can benefit from our methodology. Years ago, when I started developing all this, and I was presenting to audiences, parents of adoptees would come up to me and they go, you know, my child doesn't have autism, but what you're teaching is exactly what I'm learning. And then when the trauma-informed community became larger and more prominent in all of our lives, it was the same thing. And it's like, yes, there's so many different pathways into social learning, but once you arrive there, this is how the social world works. Let's learn about that. So the social world, you would attend and interpret in complex landscapes, perspectives, as I already mentioned, across developmental ages. Cultures are similar but different. Like as we travel around the world, the social thinking largely teaches about humanity. I have a thought, you have a thought. I have feelings, you have feelings. We think about each other. We try to read the intentions. We have expectations for what's going on. We expect you to notice what's going on. And so our work has been adapted across culture, across the world. And then, but that doesn't minimize culture. When we're talking about thinking with the eyes, we're not saying you must use your eyes this way. When I'm working with a Japanese audience or Asian audience, when they're respecting another, when they're showing respect, they're dropping their eyes. In our culture, when we show respect, we raise our eyes. And so you have the bandwidth of adjusting the social response based on the cultural norm that is being taught. So we don't predict that or regulate that. So the goal is to help students learn to navigate, to regulate in the social world, as that requires these competencies. So we've already talked about so much of it's taken for granted. And, you know, just to kick that point home, when a child is, I just had a grandbaby a month ago. Right when I turned 60, I'm hitting all the milestones very predictably. And so now one of the things we're watching for in the grandson is joining in attention, social smiles, but we're also looking at motor development and how much he's evolved in that in a month. And with babies, as they're evolving in that first year and a half of life, we're looking at things like rolling over in bed and sitting up and creeping to crawling to standing to walking to running. And if a baby struggles with that, is significantly behind in developmental milestones, all over the world, people are sending that child to go work with something like a physical therapist. What's unfortunate all over the world is when a baby is not joining in attention, is not achieving social smiles, is not seemingly aware, really paying attention to what other people are doing around them, that often the advice of a doctor would be just play with them more, have them join a church group, just, join a team sport, that'll do it. And it's like, no, it's not that easy. It's not that these children are the parent hasn't tried, that there isn't a social community for them. It's that their brain neurologically is not receiving the information, and we really do need professional support to help everyone learn to not take social for granted. So here's what I wanted to show you, is that we've taken all this information. Part of the journey of our work is I got a lot of the tools that we teach up and running early on, but trying to make sense of how do I explain this to the adult parent professional has always been the hardest part. Like, what exactly are we doing? And so when I got inside of the social information processing literature, which says, here's how brains perceive social information, doesn't matter the diagnostic label, it doesn't matter the emotional experience, there is an order to how the brain perceives social information, just like there's an order to how we move our body to be able to crawl or walk. And so there's 4 steps, and we've taken this abstract set of information and drilled it down concretely to help us all focus. The first step is social attention. If you are not attending, you cannot interpret. So we've got to socially attend. The brain is very different. When it's attending to geometric shapes, is not the same type of attention as attending to all of these abstract social cues. So a number of our kids will attend to, like I had a friend's kid who, in the old-fashioned swings, he just stared at the click, the little shape, for hours. He wasn't really forming social attention as a baby. I didn't know that much about this 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but it became pretty evident by the time he was 2 or 3. I was already involved in learning about social. By the time he was 2 or 3, it became very obvious that he was not of a social mind. And he ended up being diagnosed with Asperger's, but it was fascinating to look back at that, and because how much of his early years was not able to understand, to make sense of the social attention. There isn't a ton of information out there in the research about that. You will find information through eye tracking, but this bigger topic of social attention, people are still struggling because it's so abstract. The second area then in competencies, attend, interpret to make meaning. The social mind is a meaning maker. You have to interpret in order to problem solve. So once you're interpreting, okay, this is what's going on. If you and I are part of the social situation, now we got to figure out, okay, what are we going to do about that? That's the problem solving. What should I do? And that's where the social response gets created. Okay, I'll do this. Here's how I know I should be approaching it. And that's where we bring this interpretation and problem solving, attend, interpret, problem solve. And then we do work with students on how we use our behavior to be able to form the response that we want. When is it too close? Or how do you enter a group when you have social anxiety? Things like that. And then through this process, you're constantly evaluating what's going on around me, how am I doing? So making sense of it visually, we've got this, and I know time, I'm going to run a little into our Q&A time, but this is an iceberg. We use this model too. But the reason I chose an iceberg was because this, above the waterline of the iceberg, that's all it appears to be. With children, I still remember as a kid thinking, oh, icebergs were this big, and then learning later, oh my gosh, they're huge. We just can't see their foundation. That's how I feel the social world works, that we stare at this little iceberg of behavior and we make all these judgments about the behavior without trying to study the foundation. So that's what I've been talking to you about. And so what's the foundation? Attend, interpret, self and others. We problem solve to socially respond. This whole process leads us to what we call social cognitive self-regulation or social thinking regulation, self-regulation. And it's when we're trying, we have a goal. I want to be friendly. I want to be included. I want to talk to somebody. Those are all goal-oriented behaviors. I want to be nice. You can also have a goal, do I want to be rude? I'm just so fed up, I want to be rude. So if you want to be rude and we interpret you as rude, we could argue that that's really good social behavior because you are being perceived as you wanted. For many of our students and clients, the problem is that they have a goal, they want to be included, they want someone to talk to them, but their behaviors are not in alignment with the goal. So like one of my clients, the kid who always told me that he hates everybody, they're jerks. Once he started realizing how the social world worked, he wanted to be part of it, but he was always standing back and not talking to people. So he'd be like, why aren't people talking to me? And it's like, well, your body's over here and your brain, you know, you're turned away. It doesn't look like your brain's in the group. They're not seeing it that way. All right, I need to rush through these later slides. All right, social interpretation. You're probably already figuring this out. It's a lot of moving parts. It's amazing our brain does it. This is only 7 of probably countless things our brain does to actually interpret. What do we already know about the world? What's the situation? Who are these people? What do we know about them? Happy, sad, mad. What are people feeling? Self-conscious emotions, guilt, embarrassment, pride, joy. You know, we make a lot of decisions off of pride, and we also make a lot of decisions to avoid embarrassment, and we tell a lot of lies, and then we feel guilty. So this is the normal social mind at work. And when I say we tell a lot of lies, you know, if somebody's wearing clothing that you don't like and they say, how do I look in this? And you say, you look great. Then you're manipulating, right? And that's part of this whole system. And actually, we expect you to say that unless you're really good friends with this person. And you go, do you want me to honestly tell you? But that takes a really deep relationship to be able to pull that off. So the social world's complicated. It involves basic theory mind. I have thoughts, you have thoughts. We manipulate thoughts. And then as you think through this and you're metacognitively aware of these parts, here's the super challenge. You have to do it in millisecond timing. That's the advanced, applied, spontaneous theory mind. So some of your kids that you live or work with, they may be able to tell you what they should do, but they can't do it in that moment. And then we blame them sometimes because this kid knew better. But actually, it's showing up in the research that there's a world of difference in the brain between knowing what to do and actually doing it. And that's a whole nother level of advanced thinking. These things together become critical thinking. And you can look at this list. If you are involved in teaching reading comprehension, here's your list of part of what reading comprehension is about. So now you start to see, oh, the social mind travels right into the curriculum. Social studies, history, literature, written expression, narrative language, working in groups. Social is a huge part of academic, the social mind. It's just people don't know it. I was in the Philippines giving a talk at a big international school on all of this, and a writing specialist came up to me. She goes, you're blowing my mind. You're just blowing my mind that social is part of writing. And it's right, because in the social world, the mind is the grand interpreter. And the social world shows up every night when you turn on your screen and you watch the news or a YouTube clip or people in a movie. The only way you make sense of it is through your social mind. It is your interpreter. So I want you to watch this. I'm going to have you watch a couple of clips. I'm going to show you where anxiety comes to this, and then I will just wrap up and open it up for Q&A. So you guys, I want you to now watch yourself think about thoughts and feelings as you make sense of this story in context. So you've got to figure out the situation and the people and what's going on, the dilemma, to be able to figure out what's happening. I love these clips that don't have language because it means your brain has to really attend, interpret, and problem solve without any language-based assistance.
Look at the cute dog.
All right, so attend, interpret. You have got to figure out the man, his intention. He drops his brownie in the back. Just coincidentally, the dog gets pulled because he sees another dog, drops the brownie, picks it up. Right when they're walking by, their world knowledge, very different. Oh my God, he just picked that up from behind a dog. It's brown. He eats it. They're disgusted. He looks at them friendly, waves, and then he reads their faces, social thinking. Oh my gosh, why are they looking at me like that? Replays it in his mind, sees it from their point of view, and he's horrified. That's incredibly complicated and incredibly, it's fun to think about, or it's interesting. If this was written out in a short story, it would be called reading comprehension. Because it's in a movie, we don't necessarily give it that much weight academically, but it's really important. So as we kind of wrap this up, I want you to think about that not everyone I work with has the same capacity for social emotional learning. In fact, we look at the spectrum of social cognition, not just the spectrum of autism. And the more literal our student, the harder it is to engage their social attention, the weaker their social interpretation because they're literal, and they're also a little less self-aware. Even if we consider them to be very good students who are highly motivated, and that's who ended up in my office. I was doing 2 different assessments a couple of years ago, 2 different teenagers in 2 different months. I showed them that same clip as part of my dynamic informal assessment. I let them watch it twice to really kind of wrap their head around it. And then I want to understand how they are understanding what we just saw. And one of the things I do is always ask them to give a title so that I can see if they can crisp it up to a main idea. Can they take all this information, create a main idea? I'm sure a number of people who are watching this have children or students who struggle with a topic sentence. They can't get the main idea. They're detail-oriented people. So check out their response this is me interviewing them. I'm going to pull it.
There was the man's dog and the woman's dog. And I think the man dog and the women's dog were having a relationship.
Guess what? There is a dog in this story, and the dog actually met another dog. When I watched it more carefully, the main character hasn't dared the dog to tell me, hasn't that dog just been meaning friend, I think.
Okay, so if you're going to create a title for this, at school when you write papers, you have to create a title. And what do titles do?
Describe to us what the story's about.
Perfect. So after you watch it a second time, is the title still 2 Dogs in a Park?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
So if you're going to give a name to this, like if you're going to say the name of the story is, how when you write a story you put a little title on it?
The name of the story is Day in the Park, I think.
So with Rowan, the first student, we went through frame by frame by frame by frame by frame the story to attend, interpret, respond. One of the problems our students have is finding relevance in all this information. I was fascinated by the fact that these 2 teenagers, very similar in age, very similar in kind of cultural background, both of their parents are well-traveled, and these guys are very motivated students, but they both interpreted this clip to be about these 2 dogs in the park, and they missed all the other information. And it just makes you stop and think about, how do we understand how to help them if we think they see the world the way we see the world? And how do we begin to understand how they interpret it so that we can, 1, be compassionate, that they're not trying to do things wrong or differently, that they truly don't see the world our way. And now, how can we help them to start to make sense of it and help them to see that there is a plan going on in this, and guide them through. I got emails from both of those parents unsolicited within a couple of months going, wow, just being with you at the assessment changed what we were doing. We never thought about the interpretation part of social. We were always working on the response. So with that, I just wanted to show you that wrapped around the social competency model are these different lines. The light blue line is sensory processing, that if your sensory system is not regulated, there's a very good chance that it is making it difficult to also regulate or learn in the social cognitive way, because our sensory will distract us, overwhelm us, and we can't access our social mind or even learning in that. Anxiety and depression do the same thing. Anxiety and depression, it's well documented in mental health, will just put a stop sign up to your social cognition. Anxiety will swallow up your ability to focus on what's going on outside of you in this world that surrounds you. Screen time overwhelm or screen time overload on portable devices or stationary devices. We've known, everyone's been talking about this pre-COVID, and in COVID, we almost just have to kind of hold our hands over our eyes and go, what can you do? There's no option, and thank God for screens for kids to have some semblance of social. But bringing them back from screen time into face-to-face time is really important. And I think maybe a silver lining of the pandemic was it showed us how viscerally important face-to-face communication is. Even just that hand on one's shoulder is a world of difference. And so screen time friendships are valid and valuable, but it's hard to maintain healthy mental health screen time alone over duration, that we really need to be part of this face-to-face world. So the last slides on this really point you in the direction of a free article you can read that will take you to break down that competency model for you. And then just looking at, I've already talked to you about the vocabulary, and you can look at, we have developmental because social is developmental. We have core books that teach broadly, and then we have different developmental ages all the way through adulthood. We call our adult book the book for adults, largely focused on at work. Good intentions are not good enough, because we've seen too many people lose jobs because their intentions were good, but they were not read as having good intentions. And how do we help you to have good intentions and be read as having good intentions is kind of at the heart of our work. We also have a big annual conference that last year started, we went to live stream for obvious reasons, and that will continue this year. This is the first year you don't actually have to know much about social thinking to really participate fully in this. We've got 3 different keynote speakers on the topics of diversity, tenacity and resilience, social competency and hope. Pam and I also keynote for an hour each day, and with a Q&A. This particular conference always just gets rave reviews as we all stretch outside of our comfort zone in our learning and around relevant topics. So with that, this is our website. If you haven't been on it, you guys speak close enough to our English language for forgiving, and forgive us for the way we misspell words like behavior in the United States. But you can access so many free articles, webinars, and look at a range of both digital and print products that we have out there. So with that, I will now stop sharing and be available for a little bit shorter Q&A. Sorry about that. I'm fine staying a few minutes later too.
Okay, that's great stuff. Thank you very much, Michelle. That was amazing. That was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, there was so much in there to actually try and a bit of a whistle stop tour. So, you know, we're going to have to get you back to expand on these things a little bit more, because it's an area that I've never really thought about particularly. So to hear the way that you describe things and some of the aspects that you tackle, absolutely fascinating, and really, really relevant to many of our young people. Absolutely. So there are some questions that have come in, so we will try and get through all of them. I am conscious of time, but we'll see how it goes. Can I just say before I forget as well that some of the information that Michelle shared there on some of her slides, I can forward those on to you, to attendees after. It won't be today, it will probably be tomorrow, folks, I'm afraid. But some of the information, the free bits and pieces that Michelle shared there as well, I can show you those links so we can actually get that information to you. But to the questions. So the very first question is, how does social thinking fit with children who have been bullied and have very low self-esteem?
So chicken and egg question, right? Being a weathered and many-year professional, I think it's also, there are children who are singularly bullied and they do nothing in response to that bullying. And then we also have a lot of kids who are bullies and bullied. So I don't want to answer this question with the idea that all children who are bullied are without creating a little bit of the storm around them. And I just feel I need to throw that out there because I work with complicated kids. So bullying is very much a part of the experience of many people, and then being singularly bullied, like really bullied. What we will see, bullies can bully for any kinds of reason, but if you have a child who's just constantly picked on, here's my guess is bullies go after vulnerable situations. We adults sometimes struggle to see social issues that the best diagnostician, if I could go to the peer group and just say to them, this is totally, you cannot do this. But if we wanted to figure out who has social problems and who needs treatment, just go to the peer group and say, write down the names of the kids who are socially awkward, and they will be on it within 2 days of meeting. Where us adults are like, oh, he's so nice, he's such a good student. And when it takes us like 2 years and 5 hours of meeting, but the peers figured it out from the beginning. So peers are, unfortunately, and if they have a strong social mind, really astute at figuring out people's vulnerabilities. Then we have so that we will absolutely talk about bullying, but that's not the singular reason we would meet with somebody. We would meet with somebody in developing their own awareness to kind of build up some of the self-esteem in terms of you feel stronger esteem when you actually understand what's going on around you. So like I can talk about some of my adult clients, one of them's just goes back to 4th grade bullying. I think she played a role in all of that as well, as I know her. But when we age up, we keep holding ourselves harnessed to our younger self. So even though we develop more competencies over the years, a 17-year-old may have a lot more ability, but maybe keep going back and talking about when they were bullied when they were younger. And then I work with them on, you did have that experience, and certainly we empathize and relate. And I go, are you that same person? So over time, we may hold ourselves harnessed to these really horrible memories and not recognize that actually we are doing better and better, and we actually do have more competencies. In the moments of bullying, it's all about getting that kid into a safe place and teaching them. There's so many philosophies on bullying, so I'm not going to espouse one philosophy over another other than getting that child to safety and knowing they should be finding that safe person. And also, we're going to teach kids. Some of our kids are really naive. They do not understand when they're being manipulated. And so we've also got to see, does this kid not interpret what they're being asked? And so the bully doesn't have to be a kid who punches you. The bully can just be the kid who says, hey, look at that puddle. I wonder if you could be part of a competition. How high will that splash you if you jump in it, right? And so a number of my kids are bullied because they don't interpret what's going on. And then they think they're being nice. They think they're being friends.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go on, Paula. Go. Sorry.
I was just going to say we have another question. Do you want me to move on to the next question?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
How does felt safety impact social competencies?
Sorry,
Thinking about the work of, oh,
sorry, let me just, I have to switch cameras. I just, something fell off my, I'm still here. Let me get to the right camera. Why are neither one showing up?
You know, listen, there had to be something go wrong this evening, and Michelle, you've taken a hit for the team, so it's very selfless of you.
It just came back. Okay, wait, I think it's gonna work. My whole lighting system fell off my computer when I was talking.
If it's going to go wrong, it might as well go wrong spectacularly.
Here's the computer I'm on now. Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't know if you can see the question as well. How does felt safety impact social competencies? Thinking about the work of Stephen Porges and social engagement, part of our, I can't say this, autonomic nervous system. I'm tripping over my words.
So you're talking about the polyvagal system. Yes, that's really interesting to me, this primitive kind of deep reaction we have emotionally that makes us kind of, we struggle to put cognition in the middle of that. And so I'm absolutely fascinated by that. And I think it all is like, yes, this is a system that we're starting with now. How can we learn about that system? Because right now I'm working with some really dysregulated adults. And it's fascinating because they're professionally accomplished. One of them left his job because he was just so tired of being dysregulated in the work world. But now the question is, how can you understand? So a lot of my guys who are struggling with that also don't have a sensation of their feelings. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. So I'm going to always be breaking stuff down and unpacking it. Yes, we all start with, our kids are starting with things that are not a level playing field, right? They've got these extra challenges. So how can we help them learn how to manage what they have? And cognition and metacognition is the route. I was talking to one of my clients and saying, unless you can take that moment, first you got to breathe, right? Because breathing is going to break up that tightening and that really fast response within us, and it's going to take us back. And now we've got to know that there is that space between stimulus and response. But this is a little tiny answer for a much bigger question. And every individual is complex in how they're handling these things. I will say that I think a number of my students truly have an emotional learning disability. And emotional learning disability kind of lines up with the term called alexithymia, or just a lack of awareness of their emotional self. They either know they're freaking out or they know they're calm, and they have no sense of what it even knows what it feels like to be calm. I was talking to one of my clients I actually sent him to Stephen Porges's articles, and I asked him one day to tell me what it felt like to become calm. Like, what does calm feel like? And he became completely unglued. I have no idea what calm feels like. And it was like, okay, we're going to back way, way, way up. Here's what I am no longer ever going to assume, that even though my students can say happy, sad, mad, afraid, that they really have any real sense of that in themselves and others in the social world. Let's back up. I actually did a free webinar, and it's on our website. We did it for the start of this past school year, about how to help children learn about their emotions, their feelings and stress. And it gives a tool on it about like this little emotion journal, kind of feeling journal. So you might want to check it out. It's free to you, but it looks at that piece.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Michelle. Okay, so this next question is all about twins. So the person has written that they have twin girls who are aged 9, but missed out on early years learning and social play and skills. Have you any experience or advice on how to specifically help twins who struggle socially and emotionally, and especially to see that they are individuals? One of my daughters is very self-aware, whereas the other struggles to see that she is her own person.
Yeah, I don't know that last word. That is an English idiom, at harebone.
Sorry, that was maybe my accent. So just that last sentence, one of my daughters is very self-aware, whereas the other struggles to see that she is her own person.
Oh, her own person. Sorry.
Yeah, it's my Yorkshire accent.
It's my English accent.
No, that's sorry.
Yes, I actually do have a lot of experience working with twins, identical twins. I guess her questions, there's identical twins who can still be of different social learning abilities, or they can be fraternal. The identical twins are not really identical as much as we call them that. So whatever it is, one of the challenges in the twin, I mean, there's a real grace in twinship, and I've watched twins grow old from 9 years old into their following a set of twins now who are in their just going into their 40s.
Wow.
And fairly aloof, but very smart. They both have college degrees, but they're very different personalities. One of them is absolutely more aloof, and the other one is more engaged. And what I did working with the twins, both of my twin sets that I've worked extensively with now, going on 25 years with both twin sets, and seeing others along the way. When I have one that's clearly got self-awareness, which I have had, and the other one that does not, I actually do work with the child who has awareness to have them develop awareness that his learning abilities, his ability to be able to figure things out are actually a little different from his brothers. And so in that light, as much as they're twins, I'm going to see them differently, and that we're not about the same expectations and the same learning, just like we would with any sibling set. But there's a real comfort with the twin piece too, because there is a health I've seen with twins, and I don't know if this is going to show up in your family, but the fact that they always have the other has really kept a number of my twins from feeling so desperately lonely, like someone might have who's not able to form relationships when they're not a twin. So there's a grace in it. But I would, here's what I don't do. I don't talk about labels. I don't say, well, one sibling, one of the twins who's a little bit more able, she has awareness. You're diagnosed this and your sister's diagnosed this. I wouldn't talk about that at all. I talk about social learning. Your brain makes it a little bit easier to understand that people have thoughts and feelings about you. Your sister's brain makes that a little bit more tricky. So she's not going to be picking up on this as quickly. And I just talk about it very matter-of-factly with anyone I work with. Here's the challenge with the sibling that is more aware. She is much more likely to develop mental health problems of anxiety and depression, because when you're unaware socially, you're kind of you're protected in the fact that you're really not noticing that you're not being included in a group. But those who are more aware, I have a number of students, we have a whole category called weak interactive social communicators, who are highly aware about what's happening around them, like the dynamics of whether they're included or not, but they're not aware enough to know what they're doing in terms of their competencies or lack thereof to be able to patch repair systems in. Okay. So they can get super depressed because they notice they're not being included, their intentions are good, and then they feel like it's everyone else's fault. And depending on their personality, they go internal and they beat themselves up with social anxiety, or they get external and they start exploding and blaming everybody else for that lack.
That's absolutely, that's such an interesting answer, because I would imagine that a lot of the focus would go on the twin that possibly is slightly less confident, has less self-awareness, but in actual fact the focus is on the other one, and then that brings them together. So there's a leveling almost.
I have to say it's very hard on the parent, because this might be an example of one child needs a behavioral treatment, the other one needs more of a social thinking ed treatment, but the one who's behavioral the one who's not aware is so clueless that you have to watch every single thing they do. Because they don't have any natural learning, or very little. So parents will say every single thing they're learning I had to directly teach.
Yeah, yeah.
The one who may be more vulnerable because they're aware of what's going on a little bit more is now a child who needs a very different type of support in terms of helping manage their mental health while also helping them develop competencies. The other piece is the twin who's a little bit more able is always seeing the less able twin and thinking they're the same. So they may not push themselves as hard. I haven't seen too many twins reject each other. I see siblings reject each other, but not twins. And so there's a lot this parent has, it's a really excellent question. Okay, I think as much as you can, appreciate working with them individually and yet valuing their relationship together.
Good. Challenging times ahead. Paula, another question, please.
There is another question. There's a huge growth in social and emotional education. If everyone has a different capacity for social competencies, how would you suggest differentiating within school settings?
All right, that's a really good question. So there is a huge growth in social emotional learning, and there are published curriculums that are pretty generic out there, and they're good, but they start with the assumption that everyone has core social competencies, and we need to just practice being, have awareness of how to handle bullies, or like the stuff that typical kids routinely get involved with in terms of relationships. The world has also become way more complicated than when I was a kid, and perhaps yourself, because we've got digital screens. So now we've got dual platforms, and the more distant we are from each other in relationship, the nastier we are, right? So hopefully social emotional curriculums are taking on some of that more advanced class stuff. Here's the problem that I see with these kind of general curriculums is they don't break it down enough for our kids who are learning how to be competent. And so when I've gone and sat in some of these classrooms, it drives me sometimes a little bit nuts that I say, going, look, we're providing social emotional learning, and my little spaced out client is sitting there completely spaced out saying tangential things, but people are going, check, she did social emotional learning, but it wasn't at her level, so she couldn't understand it. So I think that's kind of your answer, is what is helpful is helpful. And a social emotional if the kid if he's in a social emotional learning program, he continues to be getting in a lot of trouble, and they're saying he's just not listening, I might respond with, we're probably not breaking this down enough, and there's a lot that we're assuming he's understanding. All of the generalized social emotional curriculums I have seen assume children already know how to problem solve. We just tell them you should be problem solving. They know how to form relationships. We just tell them they should do more of it. They know how to deal with some conflicts. We just want to teach them how to be more, resilient, or how to manage conflicts a little bit better. My kids, not necessarily. So that's a piece to look at. And I do think it's confusing, because even my marketing team will say, you're social emotional learning. And I keep working with my team going, we're not the same. We are breaking all of this stuff down.
I think when you look through your books, actually, there is so much there, the vocabulary to explore. I think, we teach maths and we teach literacy, and within those two big things, you could break it down endlessly. And it's the same, I think, with the social competencies. It's massive, right, for people. But I do like what you're saying about the thinking. And encouraging the flexible thinking. You have to be always adapting and responding all of the time.
That's right. That's a definition of social, is to constantly adapt to what's going on. In our work, we do something like the 4 steps of communication, and we're just like, you use your eyes and your body, and you first of all have a plan, your eyes, your body, then your words. And just by breaking it down, because sometimes I go see groups where they just sit with kids across tables talking and practicing conversations, but they never get up, move around, have to form a group. And then these kids who learn how to talk don't know how to walk and talk. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, just to always think holistically, do they really understand all these aspects?
Brilliant.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And part of what you're saying there as well, by breaking it down, is the assumption that that what you see in front of you is actually you know, somebody who is, so chronologically and developmentally, they're the same. You're just looking at the person, you're not actually taking the time to break down what that person actually is and what that person actually needs. So,
and I think one of the biggest misdirections in schools is standardized testing. And it's not that I don't see value in standardized testing, but once we decide a child is bright, we then don't think they can not be bright.
yeah.
And that we think if a child has language and can yell at us or later tell you what they did wrong, then they should have been able to do it right in that moment. And it's not how it works. I know I shouldn't speed, and I speed all the time. I know I shouldn't eat donuts, and I eat donuts. You know, us adults, we buy memberships to gym we don't use, and then we're mad at our kids when they know what they should do and they don't do it. But we do it all the time as adults, because it's very hard to do what you know you should do. But we do it. We often blame our kids for should have known better, when actually they really didn't understand the impact they were making around others.
Your point about lies as well really struck a chord with me. You know, about the lies that we tell all the time as adults. And then you come across children who get into trouble because they've told lies, and they're, you know, great big whopping lies. And a lot of our children actually do that a lot. But then, you know, if you're trying to match up and see it through their eyes, and I can see where all the confusion comes from.
It's very confusing. And actually, you know, it's a moral issue when it comes to which lie we will accept versus which one we don't, and a cultural issue. But I also tell my students, I had a kid who proudly wrote that one of the things his brain makes easy is lying. And I said to him, you always try to keep our kids from finding a way to freak you out. So I just said to him, wow, that is so cool, because do you know that if you're not able to manipulate other people's minds, you cannot live independently? I'm like, hey, I'm glad you're developing that ability.
Silver linings everywhere you look. I remember my mum telling me, you know, it's a case of it's okay to tell white lies, which was even more confusing and just muddied the waters even more. The person who asked that last question actually has just popped a wee comment in the chat there, saying that the meaning that we give things is largely dependent on the language we have and use. So it was a great point that you made there. So fabulous. We have one final question, if that's okay, Michelle. Sure. I'm conscious of the time here. We're 25 to 10 UK time, 25 to 1, I presume. Lunchtime nearly in California, isn't it? Yeah. So lunch is very important. I won't keep you very much longer. We'll just go for this final question. And it is, my daughter is social and makes friends, but when there is a disagreement between her and her friend, she is devastated. Whilst her friends can move on, she is distraught. She had to move classes in school because she couldn't face one friend every day. She is 9 and has developmental trauma.
Okay. And she's 9 years old. So I would probably approach, you know, and I'm sure this has been approached, but one, how normal conflict is, right? So it's really about, we expect conflict. I actually wrote an article this year about friendship that's free on our website. And it actually talks about what friendship really is. And friendship involves conflict, and it involves conflict resolution, right? And so I would say the 9-year-old has a very pure, like, cartoonish idea of friendship is always happy, loves, hearts. And so I would work with her on investigating what friendship, like she could be a detective and even write a little thing if she likes writing or making movies about what friendship really is. Friendship feels good. We like being included, but it doesn't mean we're always happy. It doesn't mean we aren't bored with our friends. And it certainly doesn't mean that our friends don't annoy us or we don't annoy our friends. Now, if she's a little girl who's making friends but ends up in a lot of the same kind of conflict, she may still, and she has a developmental trauma, I would say, diagnosis, I would say, you know, I wouldn't be outside of the paradigm that she still could be working on some competencies if there's a pattern to the trauma, the arguments that she's in or the conflicts. For example, she could be a kid who always wants to get her way. I'm not saying she is, but that's something I see is our kids with a higher level ones can make friends, but then they get very insistent about what friendship looks like according to them. And then when people don't want to go along with that, they're furious. So keep the lens open. You don't have to look awkward to have a social challenge. It's just you're not able to manage through how to navigate to regulate.
Yeah, we talk sometimes about the rupture repair cycle as well, which kind of fits in with what you were saying there as well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And it's really like you expect conflict. You don't expect friendships to be harmonious if they're really close friendships, and that's okay. But now, how are you going to manage that? We actually have a tool that we developed called social behavior mapping, where we'd say, you know, it's in a situation, what's expected affects how, when you do something expected, affects how people feel, which affects how they treat you, which affects how you feel yourself. If anyone does something unexpected, it affects how other people feel, which affects how they treat you, which affects how that person feels themselves. And we just keep walking through these journeys because we can still be quite ego-oriented in friendship and really want our way, especially at 9. What a tricky age.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, we're constantly reminded that conflict is bad. You know, we just have to accept things, and it's nice and it's lovely, and, you know, it's all unicorns and fluffy things and all, you know, and all the rest of it. And actually, we're not doing any favors to anybody, you know, in the long run. So,
you know, and I want to add to that. We're also taught that negative emotions are bad.
Yeah.
And negative emotions are not bad. We have to learn how to manage our feelings, but not avoid them. And I actually was in London, and I got into this very big debate with someone in the audience who was saying positive behavior, positive emotion is, we're not even allowed in our school, she said, to mention negative emotion, that you're not allowed to feel negatively. You can only talk about positive. And I was like, oh, this is actually not, this is not how the brain works. The brain experiences all feelings. But she had really, like, there's a whole group of people out there really misunderstanding what it means to work on positive emotion. And it doesn't mean you stay positive. It means you push positive. You realize you can get back there.
Yeah.
But none of us get stuck on positive emotions, but we do get stuck on negative.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And I think that nugget of that gem of information is a really good place to maybe just finish up for this evening.